Hey, it's Jordan, the Millionaire Millennial, and welcome back to this series about how to build a software as a service. This is the last video in this series, and we're going to be talking about exiting, as in selling your business for lots of money. And I'm going to talk about how much you probably will be able to sell your business for and all sorts of different stuff that goes into exiting. But of course, this is the last video in the series, as in if you haven't watched all the ones prior, go watch those first, because none of this will make any sense at all. So the very first thing I want to talk about exiting is most people don't think they're ever going to exit their business, right? And I sure didn't when I built my first software company. I never thought that I would ever sell it. I thought I'm going to just build this thing and I'm going to just have it forever and it's going to be great. But the reality is you change your mind sometimes in your life and you don't want to continue doing what you thought you would be doing for, ever. And you want to build your business, even if you think you're not going to sell it. You want to build your business from the perspective that you are going to sell it for two reasons. One is you might actually end up selling it, obviously. The second reason is if you build it from the perspective that you're going to sell it, then it makes it a lot easier to run because you actually are excluding yourself from the business. Because when you sell a business, you usually don't go with the business. Now, occasionally that happens, like when Ring, which is a company that Amazon recently bought not too long ago, the owner and founder of Ring actually went with the company and continued to operate it. But most of the time, you're not going to go with the business when you sell it, right? You're the founder, you're the owner, but when you sell it, there's a new owner. And so you want to really exclude yourself from the business, and you essentially want the software and the SaaS to run itself. And what I mean by that is, of course, you might have to hire some employees or do something that you can operate the business essentially without having to do stuff yourself. So you actually take yourself out of the business altogether and it runs smoothly without your intervention. That's essentially where you want to get it to, whether you sell it or not. And following up on that, you want to make sure it's as simple as possible, because the more complex your business is, the less likely a new owner is going to want to have to figure it all out, and the less likely new owner is going to want to buy it. And even if you were to keep it, the less likely it is that you're going to want to keep it. Because if it's so complicated and convoluted, then you're going to be like, this is a pain to run. But if you keep it simple, as in just very simple operations day to day, very simple integrations with other softwares, whatever your software is going to do, as long as you're keeping it simple, then you can sell it. And it's a lot easier for you to run it if you want to keep it. Now, something you're probably wondering, of course, is how much you could sell your business for. Now, there's all sorts of different ways to value a software company and just different companies in general. What I have seen and what I have sold Atlas on is a typical 24 to 36, maybe even 40 times the monthly profit. That means if your software is doing about $2,000 a month in profit, and again, remember from the very first video in this series that SaaS has a really high profit margin. So if you're making $2,000 a month, you could potentially sell your SaaS for $50,000 to even $80,000. Now that's pretty substantial when we're talking about only making $2,000 a month. I mean, $2,000 a month is, barely enough for a single person to live on, but you could sell that business for potentially 80 grand. And that's a lot more than $2,000 a month. So that's typically how these things are evaluated on, between 24, 25 to 36, even 40x multiplier. Now, most businesses will sell in between, right? Maybe at like a 30x or a high 20s or something like that. And that's essentially what Atlas is valued at. Atlas was valued at a 30, I think it was exactly 30x multiplier. So that is a very typical valuation that you would normally get. Now, what changes those levers, right? What makes a company more valuable? Like, why would someone pay 40x instead of 24x? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, and I already mentioned one already, and that is simplicity, and is the owner involved in the day-to-day operations, right? So the first thing that anybody that wants to buy the business from you is going to ask, what do you do on the daily basis? Because they don't want to have a bunch of stuff that they need to do, because odds are someone that's buying the business from you is going to want to grow it. That's pretty much why anybody buys a business, is to grow it. So they don't want to spend a ton of time doing a bunch of daily tasks. So they want to make sure that you're not doing anything every day to work on this business. And so if you can say, oh, I basically don't do anything, I only work like a couple hours a day or maybe a couple hours a week on this particular software, that's going to be a great thumbs up for a new owner, and they're going to be willing to pay more. Another great one is not having a ton of overhead. So if you've got a bunch of random expenses and you have all these other subscriptions that run the software and it's all this, complicated stuff, again, it's not simple. That's going to devalue your company. That's why the first couple points I put here was exclude yourself from the business and try to keep it simple. Those are two pretty important aspects of the valuation of your company. Another very big one is how long has your company been operating? So a company that's only been operating for a few months is going to sell for a lot less than if it had been operating for like 2 or 3 years. So you can build a business relatively quickly, and if you get it up and running and it's making profits in 6 months, then you can sell it then. But just know that if you were to hold on to it for another 6 months, you could probably sell it for a lot more. And that would probably be the difference between having something like a 20-something X multiplier and a 30X or even 40X multiplier. Now, if you're like me, you don't really know that many people that want to buy a business. So the best place that I found to sell a business is on Empire Flippers, and consequently also a great place to buy businesses is on Empire Flippers. So that is where I listed Atlas. And again, I'm in the process of selling it right now. We're doing a lot of different stuff like due diligence and agreeing on the purchase, and I'll get into that in a second. But EmpireFlippers.com is probably the best place that I've seen to sell a business, especially a smaller business. So for example, Atlas is going to sell for multi-6 figures, right? So it's not going to sell for like millions of dollars, but it is going to sell for several hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is pretty sweet if you ask me. But there are a lot of businesses on there that sell for $20,000, $50,000, $80,000. Some businesses that are only making, $1,000 in profit a month, and they're selling for $30,000. And that's still pretty decent money, right? So that's why I like Empire Flippers, because it's not insanely high, like millions and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, and it's relatively easy to sell a business that's a little smaller. Plus the process with Empire Flippers is like super easy. I mean, essentially all I've done is had a call with someone that works there, and they kind of asked me about the financials of the business. I granted them viewer access to my Stripe account so they could verify everything. And then they just had me list some expenses, and they listed it on their marketplace, and we actually found a potential buyer within 24 hours, which is pretty rare. Is what they tell me. They told me that it takes maybe 3 months on average to sell a business that's listed on their marketplace. So keep that in mind, is it's going to take some time, a couple months to actually find a buyer that wants to buy it. Now I could just say that, I got lucky and, this buyer wanted to buy it, but the reality is I built a good business. And when you build a good business and a buyer sees it, they're gonna wanna buy it, they're gonna wanna lock it down, and that's exactly what happened. So the better you build the business, the quicker you're gonna be able to sell it, and the more you're gonna be able to sell it for. Another cool thing about Empire Flippers is that they sell like 90-something% of the businesses that are listed there. That means that if you get listed on Empire Flippers, it's pretty likely that you're going to be able to sell your business for at least somewhat close to the list price that you're asking for. The process was pretty easy with Empire Flippers too. Essentially, I just had a call with someone that worked there. We talked about my business, we talked about what I'd like to sell it for, and then I granted them access to my Stripe account just so they could view all the financials and verify everything. And it was a very streamlined, straightforward process. Once they verified everything and I gave them some of my expenses so they could verify profit, then they gave a valuation to the company at 30x multiplier, and then they listed it on the marketplace. Now they told me when they listed it that it was probably going to take on average, I think it was like 40 days or something ish to sell, so maybe like 6 weeks. So there's a lot of advanced stuff when it comes to exiting, things like earnout and escrow and processing all of that. And I won't get too much into it since this is a beginner's guide and this is just kind of how to get rolling with SaaS. So exiting is probably the last thing on your mind right now, but it is something that you should pay attention to when you're starting, because if you build it right, then you can exit big. So just keep that in mind as you're starting. You'll usually want to start with the end in mind. So even if you don't think you're going to exit, even if you don't think you're ever going to sell, you still want to build the business with that in mind. Makes it a lot easier to run and operate. When it comes to actually selling, there's a couple different options. You know, you can do an earnout, which is essentially where you might get paid a percentage of the list price that you want to sell for up front, and then you're paid, you know, every month for several months. And this gives good security for the buyer because then they know that, you know, as long as they're hitting the same goals based on the past, that they're going to be able to pay you out. So it's a good, I would say, middle ground between the two. Now, of course, you can get paid entirely up front, and that's typical for lower value deals. But when you start getting to the hundreds of thousands, that's when people might want to do earnouts. When you get into the millions, that's pretty typical. So it depends on what you're selling. But really the kind of key point with exiting is it's all negotiable. So everything's negotiable. I mean, the list price, the sell price, what you want to sell it for, how much you want to sell it, the direction you want to take it when you sell it, you know, structuring the particular payment details, it's all negotiable. So, you know, get good at negotiating, maybe brush up on your people talking abilities, also called negotiating, and get ready to negotiate for the best deal for you as well as a buyer. So, you know, negotiating isn't just about getting the best deal for yourself. It's about getting a fair deal for both sides. And that's really what you want to go after when you're negotiating any kind of deal, especially when you're selling your business. So again, I want to thank you so much for watching this series. If it helped you out, please do like, comment, subscribe, etc. But I really just wanted to make this because, again, there's not a lot of people out there talking about how to build a SaaS, and I wanted to give some information for those of you that might actually want to build something and how to do it from the business perspective, not just how to code and, you know, build something like that, but you actually have to know how to sell the product. You have to know how to do all these different stuff that we talked about in this series. So again, I really hope it helped you out. If it did, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.